Alright, Michael J. In my mind, there's 3 simple rules to follow if you want to set up any camera for vlogging. Rule number 1, as much as possible, set it up so that you can use it one-handedly. Just makes the whole deal easier. Rule number 2, whatever the camera can do well in auto mode, just let it do its thing in auto mode so your mind is free to vlog. And rule number 3, to make sure to get the most out of the battery life you have, always decrease power consumption as much as possible or as much as it makes sense given a certain scenario. So, let's do it for the EOS M3. Start by putting the camera into movie mode, then in there, use auto exposure mode. Alright, let's do this and start from the beginning. Image quality doesn't concern me. Shooting information display switching. This is the standard view, which is very useful. This one we don't need. This is great if you want to check framing and have nothing else on the screen. And this is just a good overview if you quickly want to get an idea of what settings you have set up. Display grid 1 is the one you should use. This just chunks up the display too much. Histogram doesn't concern me because I just turned it off. Reverse display, always on, because only then does the display switch once you flip the screen up. Otherwise you are going to look at yourself bottom to top in selfie mode. Image review, I turn it off because I like to use shutter autofocus every once in a while, and sometimes it happens that I push it in completely, so I take a picture, which is not what I want in the first place, and I also don't want to look at it afterwards, so that's why I turn image review off. Autofocus method, of course, face tracking and tracking. Autofocus and manual focus, I leave it off because either you're in autofocus or you're in manual focus. Manual focus peaking settings, peaking turned on. Level I leave on high, and high just defines how bright the peaking color is. No matter whether you set it to low or to high, peaking reacts exactly the same. Now red worked best for me in most occasions. Sometimes at night, blue and yellow work better, but still red is my favorite setting for almost every occasion. So if you switch to manual focus, this is what I'm talking about. This is the peaking. This shows you exactly where the focus is. Image stabilization settings, continuous, but dynamic IS, set it to 2. 2 is lens stabilization only, and 1 would be digital image stabilization, but that's a mode I recommend against because the camera then crops into the image to give you a smoother shot. Lens aberration correction. If you're using native Canon lenses, the camera more likely than not has all the data it already needs. If you're using third-party lenses, maybe there's some profiles you can download. Just have this enabled to tell the camera to make the necessary corrections. Highlight tone priority. If I'm shooting during the day, I turn this to D+, so the camera favors the highlights instead of the shadows when it exposes. When vlogging, you probably never will use custom white balance. I never touch white balance correction. What I do touch though is the picture style. Now, if you do not want to do any kind of post-production, I would simply hit up the A profile, the standard profile. I would set this to a 5, so the image overall will be decently sharp, but you're not killing fine detail with too much sharpness. Also, I would decontrast to the max, because with cameras that do not come with a very high dynamic range as it is, images that are too contrasty will look comic-y very, very quickly. This in my mind is very good to give you a more naturalistic look. Now saturation, I like to desaturate a little, but if you like your pictures to be more vivid, might as well leave it at 0 or might even go to 2. Very rarely, except for the contrast setting, I do recommend going to the extremes. Now color tone, if you're very pale like me, probably you benefit more from a yellowish skin tone. That's why I set it to 2. Now if you do want to do the full-scale post-production thing, I would go to one of the custom profiles, de-sharpen completely, decontrast completely, desaturate completely, and again, because I'm pretty pale, I would set this to 2. Now movie rec size, in case of the M3, of course it's 25 frames per second, full HD. If you were shooting NTSC instead of PAL like where I'm from, this would be 30 frames per second. Sound recording, if I'm using internal audio, I leave it at auto. If I'm using external audio, I will manually level. And depending on the mic I'm using, I will set this so it levels to around the -12 decibels if I talk into the camera, being about selfie distance away. It'll give you enough volume, but still leave some space before the sound gets distorted. Wind filter attenuator, if I'm using external audio, I turn this to off because I'd much rather have a dead cat take care of the wind noise instead of the attenuator leveling down the overall volume and leveling down my voice with it to avoid distortion. The servo AF always enabled. Now autofocus with shutter button during video mode. If this is turned on, you can half press the shutter button and force the camera to focus. In a lot of difficult situations, this is pretty much the only way you can get focus. Now create folder. Of course, if you're vlogging, you want it daily. File numbering, that's your choice, continuous or auto reset. Now video system, where I'm from, we're shooting PAL. Probably where you're from, it's NTSC. This is where you're shooting 30 frames. This is where you're shooting 25. Electronic level, just set the camera up level. Do it once for the horizontal, do it once for the vertical. And that's it. Eco mode is turned off because I want to set the power saving options myself. Auto power down is on, and display off I set to 10 seconds. Everything that saves on battery time is well appreciated. Now LCD brightness, settings like 3, 4 or 5 you only need if you're shooting in very bright sunlight and you can't see anything. 2 is fine for most occasions. The rest doesn't concern me. Beeps, I hate it when cameras beep. Hints and tips, I don't need them so I turn them off. Touch operation, sensitive. Now sensor cleaning, I always have auto cleaning turned on, so whenever you turn the camera off it quickly cleans the sensor, but every now and then you can hit clean now because this is a more thorough type of sensor cleaning. Now none of this concerns me right now. Custom functions for the autofocus assist beam disabled. Others, retract lens on power off, I don't really care. Custom controls, this is interesting. Now shutter button and this little button right here I set to force autofocus, and sometimes it comes in very handy to lock exposure. So this is what this button now does. Front dial is shutter speed, rear dial is f-stop. I never changed that. Now the custom function button right here next to the shutter button I set to autofocus method, because every once in a while you are going to switch from face tracking and tracking into one-point autofocus. In difficult situations where you really need to tell the camera what to focus on and you only need one autofocus area active, that's when you need one-point autofocus. And having the button that switches autofocus modes right next to the shutter button pretty much makes a lot of sense. This right here, the only other setting that makes sense is the white balance. So now if you click down on the click wheel, you can change the white balance. Now my menu settings, I actually like to create a menu, autofocus method, image stabilization settings, highlight tone priority, picture style, movie rec size, and sound recording. Now I have all the settings I use 90% of the time in one menu. And this is pretty much how I set the M3 up and I vlog with it. So I hope you liked the video. If you did, please make sure to leave a thumbs up. It'd be greatly appreciated. Any kind of comment or feedback is welcome and I'll try to answer as quickly as possible. Also, should you feel like supporting the channel, definitely check out the video description. There might be some product links that are interesting for you. In any case, as always, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching and hopefully see you again soon.